Willow Creek Estates was a picturesque slice of suburban America. Maple trees lining the sidewalks, perfectly trimmed lawns, and rows of similar-style homes. A gentle hush typically covered the streets, broken only by the chirping of birds or the laughter of children at play. Although the Homeowners Association, HOA, regulations were strict, most residents accepted them as part of maintaining Willow Creek's pristine aesthetic. On this unassuming summer day, a soft breeze drifted through the cul-de-sac of Spruce Circle, a spot well loved by neighborhood kids who gathered to ride bikes or draw chalk art on the sidewalk. But within the veneer of calm, tensions simmered. A few families, especially those with unique circumstances or personal expressions, often found themselves clashing with an inflexible HOA board. That board included a new, formidable figure, Brenda Aris, though in whispered circles, folks called her Karen. She was rumored to be merciless about following every bylaw to the letter, especially if it meant enforcing uniform aesthetics at all costs. For a while, she'd zeroed in on minor issues like mailbox heights or slightly mismatched paint. But soon, her targets would shift to something more personal, an 8-year-old boy's brightly colored wheelchair. That child's name was Timothy Johnson, and unbeknownst to him, his rainbow wheelchair was about to become a point of contention. By day's end, a petty act of vandalism would set the entire neighborhood on a path toward a dramatic confrontation, and a spectacular outcome no one could have predicted. Brenda Karen Aris was in her late 40s, with a rigid posture and a perpetually furrowed brow. She'd moved to Willow Creek Estates 6 months earlier, keen on escaping her previous neighborhood's lax attitudes. The moment she arrived, she managed to secure a seat on the HOA Compliance Committee by citing her passion for preserving order. Within weeks, she'd cultivated a reputation as the board's most uncompromising member. Her approach was one of zero tolerance for what she deemed visual disturbances. Painted fences? Not allowed. Flower pots in unapproved colors? Fine. Seasonal decor left up a day too long? She'd send an official warning. While some neighbors tried to humor her, others found her overbearing. Gossip circulated that Karen took secret pride in scouring every front yard for minor infractions, always wielding the HOA bylaws as her weapon. She hid behind the polite veneer of maintaining property values, but in truth, she relished control. Karen saw her role as a crusade to eliminate any perceived eyesore, even if it was an essential piece of personal medical equipment. She wasn't oblivious to the child's condition, but in her mind, conformity overrode personal expression. She believed the vibrant wheelchair clashed with Willow Creek's neutral tones. While Karen had yet to cross the line from overzealous enforcement into outright malice, her dissatisfaction with Timothy's flamboyantly decorated wheelchair festered in silence. And after several sleepless nights, fuming that she had to see that wheelchair spoiling the ambience, she resolved to do something about it. Timothy Johnson was an energetic 8-year-old who, despite a congenital spinal condition, approached life with endless optimism. Born with limited mobility, he relied on a specially made wheelchair fitted for his growth. To add fun, the wheelchair's metal panels have been painted in bright, swirling rainbow patterns, courtesy of his mother, Caroline Johnson, a crafty soul who believed Timothy deserved joy in every aspect of his daily life. Timothy adored the wheelchair's colors, as did most of the neighborhood kids. They often gathered around, admiring how the paint shimmered in sunlight. Some even helped add stickers of cartoon characters. While the design might stand out among the subdued beiges and grays of Willow Creek, for Timothy, it was a statement of personality, a symbol that he was more than just a child with a disability. Caroline and her husband, Marcus Johnson, never anticipated that something as simple as a colorful wheelchair could invite disapproval. They were new to the complexities of HOA living, having moved from a more relaxed area to be closer to specialized medical care for Timothy. Little did they know that, in the eyes of the formidable Karen, the wheelchair's bright aesthetic was an affront to the meticulously uniform environment she sought to enforce. For now, Timothy happily wheeled around Spruce Circle, trailing laughter and giggles wherever he went. But Karen lurked in the background, scowling at the bursts of color that, to her, threatened the neighborhood's refined look. Her slow-burning resentment was about to ignite into an act that would shock and outrage every parent on the block. One breezy afternoon, Timothy and his parents attended an HOA meet and greet at the community clubhouse. Tables of snacks lined the walls, and families mingled, discussing neighborhood affairs. Timothy, excited by the crowd, maneuvered skillfully through the room, his wheelchair's bright swirl of colors attracting friendly remarks from children and sympathetic nods from adults. Karen, however, studied the wheelchair with a curled lip of disapproval. She approached the Johnsons with a forced smile. "Hello, I'm Brenda Aris, from the HOA Compliance Committee." I couldn't help but notice Timothy's unique wheelchair design. Marcus, sensing tension, replied politely, "Yes, we had it painted for him. He loves it." Karen's tone hardened. "It's quite bold. In Willow Creek, we strive for uniform aesthetics. Have you considered a more neutral color to blend with the community guidelines?" Caroline frowned. "His wheelchair is a personal medical device. I wasn't aware it fell under any guidelines." Karen's lips pressed tight. "Everything visible from the street may be subject to review. We wouldn't want to upset the neighborhood's harmonious look, would we?" Stunned, Caroline mustered a calm response. "With due respect, this wheelchair is essential to my son's mobility and expression. I can't see how it contravenes any real estate aesthetics." Karen gave a clipped nod, stepping away. Though no formal complaint had yet been filed, her message was clear. She disapproved of the bright design. The Johnsons, unsettled, left the event early. They had no idea how far Karen might push this notion that a child's wheelchair disrupted the neighborhood's uniform theme. Over the next few weeks, Karen's annoyance grew each time Timothy's wheelchair rolled past her window. She insisted that every time she saw the garish rainbow pattern, it undermined the subdued color scheme Willow Creek prided itself on. She began drafting an official letter of complaint, referencing vague HOA bylaws about unsightly external fixtures. Her plan was to demand the Johnsons repaint the wheelchair in neutral tones, perhaps gray or beige, to respect the community's standards. When Karen broached the topic at an HOA compliance meeting, other members expressed skepticism. "It's a wheelchair, Brenda," one said, eyebrows raised. "Surely personal medical equipment isn't under our purview." Karen, unwavering, retorted, "But it's in plain view daily, practically an extension of the child's persona. It's no different from painting your garage door in neon stripes." The room fell silent, most members too stunned by the comparison to respond. A few suspected Karen's stance overreached the HOA's authority. Ultimately, the committee refused to adopt her complaint, concluding it was both ethically problematic and legally dubious to regulate a wheelchair's design. Karen, thwarted by her own committee, seethed privately. She grew convinced that more direct measures were needed. If the official route was blocked by so-called sympathy for the child, she would handle it in a subtler manner. A dark spark flickered in her eyes. She'd find a way to tarnish that gaudy wheelchair so thoroughly that the Johnsons would have no choice but to change it. Meanwhile, Timothy continued living a typical boy's life, attending second grade at a nearby school, playing with neighbors, and visiting the local park each Saturday. He made friends easily, thanks to his sunny disposition and readiness to laugh at the simplest jokes. On weekends, he'd zip around with other kids on Spruce Circle, the wheelchair's vibrant panels catching the sun's rays. Caroline observed her son's joy, feeling grateful that the neighborhood kids included him wholeheartedly. She noticed how Timothy's bright wheelchair seemed less a medical device and more an emblem of his unstoppable spirit. She told Marcus how each swirl of color represented a piece of Timothy's personality: red for courage, yellow for positivity, green for growth, and so on. They never regretted choosing such a bold design. Amid these happy days, no one suspected the dark plan brewing in Karen's mind. The Johnsons had glimpsed her disapproval, but they hoped her initial complaint was a passing fancy. They believed that reason would prevail if the matter came up again. After all, Who in their right mind would forcibly alter a child's wheelchair? They underestimated Karen's capacity for petty vindictiveness. Each day she watched Timothy and his bright wheels rolling by. Her resentment hardened. She convinced herself that if the child's parents wouldn't yield to HOA standards, she'd push them to do so through more covert means. On a balmy Friday evening, the Johnsons hosted a small backyard cookout. Timothy and his friends played in the grass while the adults chatted under string lights. The wheelchairs sat parked near the garage, within the fenced yard, though the gate was left open for guests to come and go. Karen, who lived just down the street, observed the gathering from her living room window. Late into the night, after the party wrapped up and lights turned off, she crept through the shadows with a small key in hand. The open gate provided easy entry to the yard. Under the faint moonlight, she approached Timothy's wheelchair, which had been left outside for a moment while Marcus carried his sleeping son indoors. Heart-pounding, Karen pressed the key's edge against the rainbow paint, drawing a quick, jagged line across the metal surface. A scrape cut through the swirl of color, revealing bare metal beneath. She froze at every rustle of night breeze, paranoid about being caught. After a few more hurried scratches, she fled, slipping away before anyone could notice. The next morning, when Caroline brought the wheelchair inside, she gasped at the ugly gouges. She assumed it must have been an accident. Maybe a lawn tool or a neighbor's bike had scraped it. She told Timothy it was just a scratch, promising they'd fix it soon. Neither mother nor son suspected intentional vandalism. But Karen, peeking from her blinds, felt a twisted sense of triumph. She believed the marred paint might prompt the family to opt for a simpler color scheme. A few days later, the Johnsons planned to touch up the scratches themselves. Caroline tried mixing leftover paint, but couldn't precisely match the swirling colors. Still, she hoped a quick dab would suffice, thinking the damage was minor. Then, on an afternoon when Timothy was napping inside, Karen struck again. She found the wheelchair on the porch, waiting to be moved into the living room. This time, Karen used a small metal file to carve deeper gouges, especially across the seat back where the rainbow design was most visible. By the time she finished, the once beautiful swirl was a web of scratches. She took care to keep footprints minimal, wiping the porch floor with a cloth. That evening, Caroline discovered the new damage and realized it was no accident. Someone was deliberately vandalizing Timothy's wheelchair. Tearful and enraged, she showed Marcus the deeper cuts. Timothy, waking to see his precious wheelchair scarred, wore a crestfallen look. "Why would someone do this, Mom?" he asked, voice trembling. Marcus seethed. "We're reporting this to the HOA and the police. This is beyond a joke." The family shock turned to a collective determination to uncover the culprit. Though they had no proof, Caroline's mind snapped back to Karen's earlier hostility. Could she truly stoop so low? Over the next day, the Johnsons installed a small doorbell camera and made sure never to leave the wheelchair outside unattended. They aimed to catch any further tampering. Meanwhile, Timothy tried to remain brave, though seeing his cherished rainbow marred caused him deep sadness. The child's heartbreak would soon galvanize the neighborhood into action against such blatant cruelty. News of the wheelchair vandalism spread quickly through Willow Creek estates. Parents were especially horrified. The notion that someone would attack a disabled child's equipment was unthinkable. Neighbors approached the Johnsons with sympathy, offering to help repair the damage. A sense of unity blossomed, fueled by righteous anger at the unknown perpetrator. At the next HOA meeting, Caroline and Marcus raised the incident before the board, demanding an investigation. Some members were appalled, promising to gather any relevant security footage from nearby homes. Karen feigned shock, stating how terrible it was that someone would commit such an act. She avoided making eye contact with Caroline. Outside the meeting, smaller clusters of residents debated who might be capable of such cruelty. Karen's name surfaced in hushed tones. Her well-known distaste for the wheelchair was no secret. However, nobody dared accuse her outright, lacking direct evidence. Still, the seeds of suspicion took root. The Johnsons hoped the newly installed doorbell camera might catch the vandal if they tried again. But for the time being, their home was filled with anxious vigilance. Timothy retreated from playing outside, afraid to leave his wheelchair out of sight. Watching her son's sparkle dim, Caroline resolved to push back. She wanted to find a way not just to fix the damage, but to show that cruelty couldn't overshadow Timothy's spirit. One evening, Caroline scrolled through social media while Timmy dozed, searching for local custom painters who might restore the wheelchair more skillfully than she could. She stumbled upon a vibrant profile belonging to Danny Sky Chavez, a street artist known for large-scale graffiti murals around the city. Sky's feed showcased bold designs splashed with color, swirling shapes reminiscent of Timmy's original style. Intrigued, Caroline messaged Sky, explaining how her son's wheelchair had been maliciously scratched. She asked if Sky could help repaint it. Within minutes, she received a reply. "I'd be honored to restore it, and maybe take it to the next level. Let's talk details." Caroline felt a surge of excitement. The idea of involving a professional graffiti artist sparked new possibilities. Maybe they could transform the damage into something even more spectacular. She consulted Marcus, who readily agreed. If some unknown vandal was bent on destroying Timmy's cherished design, they would respond by making it bigger, brighter, and impossible to ignore. Sky proposed a flamboyant concept, a swirling rainbow galaxy with stenciled stars and maybe Timmy's name hidden in the design. The wheelchair would become a piece of moving art. Over the next few days, they exchanged sketches, refining the plan. Timmy, upon hearing the idea, lit up with anticipation, exclaiming, "So the scratches will go away? And it'll be even cooler? Awesome!" As the plan solidified, Caroline felt her heartbreak easing. No matter who had done this, they wouldn't triumph over Timmy's joy. She felt a small flicker of hope that the community would rally behind such a creative act of resistance. Word of the plan to commission a graffiti-style repainting spread among neighbors, thanks to enthusiastic updates from Caroline. Some expressed delight at turning a cruel act into a celebratory display of art. However, the rumor quickly reached Karen's ears, prompting fresh outrage. She perceived graffiti as a lowbrow style she disliked even more than the original swirl design. She voiced her disapproval in an email to the HOA board. "Respected colleagues, I've learned the Johnson family is planning an even more garish paint job on that wheelchair, evidently hiring a street artist to create a graffiti-like design. I urge you to consider how this will further disturb our neighborhood's aesthetics. Our bylaws must protect us from unsightly external modifications, including personal items readily visible on sidewalks." Most board members rolled their eyes at her complaint. Indeed, personal medical equipment fell outside their regulatory domain, and the neighborhood had largely rallied to the Johnsons' defense. Karen's fervor only served to isolate her further. She refused to relent, though, convinced that each color clashed with Willow Creek's uniform image. Steeped in resentment, Karen mulled new ways to sabotage the wheelchair. But the mention of a doorbell camera and the rising suspicion of neighbors made her cautious. She concluded she'd have to wait and see the new design before acting. Meanwhile, she seethed at the thought that her initial vandalism might yield a still bolder piece of visual pollution. On a bright Saturday morning, Danny Sky Chavez arrived at the Johnsons' home carrying spray cans, stencils, masking tape, and a portfolio of designs. Timmy watched with wide eyes as Sky laid out an array of vibrant paint colors across the garage floor. Caroline greeted the artist with gratitude, offering coffee and pastries. After removing the wheelchair's side panels and seat back, Sky prepped the surfaces, sanding away the old paint and smoothing out the vandal's deep scratches. Timmy, perched nearby on a spare wheelchair from the clinic, chatted excitedly about color choices. He wanted plenty of neon green and electric blue, shades that popped. Sky began with primer, covering the marred metal. Then, using a series of stencils, Sky deftly layered swirling patterns, galaxies, starbursts, and abstract shapes. Timmy squealed whenever a fresh color was applied. Marcus and Caroline marveled at Sky's skill, how each pass of the spray can conjure magical textures. By lunchtime, The wheelchair pieces looked like cosmic art in progress, splashes of purple, pink, and turquoise blending into star-laden arcs. Neighbors strolled by, peeking into the open garage with curiosity. Some paused to compliment the emerging design. Caroline felt warmth in her chest, seeing support from folks once reluctant to defy HOA norms. For them, helping a child overshadow a malicious act took precedence over maintaining bland uniformity. Back at her house, Karen peeked through blinds, noticing a small gathering at the Johnsons' driveway. She guessed the artist had arrived. The thought of a graffiti style spreading its tentacles across the wheelchair fueled her anger. She closed the blinds, muttering curses at the notion that bright colors would soon be parading around on Timmy's every outing. Little did she realize that the effect would surpass anything she could have feared. After lunch, Sky continued the detailed work, adding stenciled comets, swirling nebulous shapes, and even the outline of Timmy's name in stylized script. A silver underlayer made the text gleam when it caught the light. The seat back featured a bold cosmic swirl, while the arm panels got an explosion of color reminiscent of a rising sun. Timmy kept exclaiming how epic it looked, occasionally steering his backup chair closer to watch the process up close. Toward late afternoon, the finishing touches emerged, small bursts of glitter paint for a subtle sparkle, plus a protective sealant over everything. Marcus carefully reattached the newly painted panels, the final assembly revealing a wheelchair transformed into a rolling masterpiece. The swirl of colors exuded a dynamic, almost living energy, as if a slice of the night sky had been captured in metal and paint. Caroline was moved to tears by the difference. The old swirl design was lovely, but this new cosmic explosion soared beyond anything they'd imagined. More than mere aesthetics, it symbolized defiance against cruelty, a testament to their determination to celebrate Timmy's individuality rather than hide it. Neighbors applauded spontaneously when Timmy gingerly slid onto his seat. His grin lit up the driveway. Sky captured photos for social media, with Timmy beaming, arms raised in excitement. The small crowd of supporters realized that a hateful act had birthed something more powerful, a vibrant statement that no act of vandalism could dull his spirit. Early Sunday morning, Timmy convinced his parents to take him for a stroll through the neighborhood, unveiling the newly repainted wheelchair to any curious onlookers. The panels gleamed in sunlight, shifting hues from violet to turquoise. The rainbow swirl had evolved into a cosmic tapestry swirling with stardust. As Timmy rolled past houses, neighbors paused, jaws dropping in admiration. Some gave cheerful waves. Children ran up to admire the stenciled shapes. Even older folks, typically stoic about changes, expressed quiet approval. More than one commented, "That's the coolest wheelchair I've ever seen," or "It's like a piece of rolling art." Marcus discreetly snapped pictures, planning to share them with extended family who had heard about the vandalism. Timothy laughed at the spontaneous attention, cherishing each compliment. Caroline's heart swelled with gratitude that their reaction overshadowed the negativity that had sparked this change. A few blocks away, Karen watched from a window as the cosmic wheelchair rolled by. She clenched her jaw, seeing how instead of cowering, the family had doubled down on color and creativity. Far from neutralizing the child's wheelchair, her sabotage had propelled it into an even more flamboyant statement. She felt her stomach churn with a mix of regret and fury. Meanwhile, the rest of Willow Creek reveled in the child's triumph. Some suggested a block party to celebrate. Others asked for Sky's contact info, eager to sponsor more uplifting community art. Unknowingly, Karen's malicious act had kindled a wave of positivity that threatened to push her anti-color crusade to the margins. Life resumed in Willow Creek with a renewed sense of unity. Timmy proudly wheeled around in his cosmic-themed chair, no longer anxious that someone would destroy it again. Thanks to the doorbell camera, the Johnsons felt prepared to catch any future tampering. They also found more neighbors stepping up to discreetly watch over them, vowing to report suspicious activity. Among the supportive voices was Eleanor Park, an elderly neighbor who remembered a time when HOAs existed to foster community rather than stifle individuality. She wrote a heartfelt note praising the Johnsons for turning adversity into art. She even proposed that the HOA formally commend Sky for helping the neighborhood celebrate diversity and resilience. Some members embraced the idea, while others worried about friction with Karen's preference for bland uniformity. Karen, though quietly outraged, found herself increasingly isolated. She tried lodging new complaints with the HOA, claiming the wheelchair design was distracting to drivers or excessively bright. But each time, the board dismissed her. Personal medical equipment was beyond their scope, they insisted. The entire fiasco had generated so much sympathy for Timmy that any anti-wheelchair stance seemed callous. Privately, Karen brooded. She realized that not only had her sabotage failed to force the Johnsons to dull the chair, but it had also created a wave of admiration for the cosmic design. She resented them for thriving in the face of her meddling. Fueled by bitterness, she contemplated whether to escalate her tactics or cut her losses. After all, suspicions ran high. One misstep and she could be caught. Still, part of her burned with an irrational desire to wipe that bright paint from existence. Buoyed by the local attention, Danny Sky Chavez posted pictures of Timmy's wheelchair makeover on social media. The post went semi-viral, garnering hundreds of likes and shares. Many commenters praised the unbreakable spirit behind converting vandalism into cosmic art. Some offered donations to support Timmy's medical expenses, but Caroline politely declined, explaining the family's insurance covered most of Timothy's needs. Despite that, a local philanthropic group, Colorful Hearts Foundation, reached out privately, wanting to contribute to any future modifications Timmy might need, like specialized wheelchair accessories or therapy sessions not fully covered by insurance. They admired the family's positivity and Sky's artistry. Touched, the Johnsons accepted a modest grant that would ensure Timmy could explore advanced mobility features down the road. The story of a vandalized wheelchair turning into an artistic triumph resonated deeply with people. Where once Timmy's bright design might have been seen as unorthodox, it now embodied hope. The Johnsons' home phone rang with calls from parents of children with disabilities, asking for advice on customizing wheelchairs or dealing with negativity. Caroline realized their response had become an inspiration, showing that adversity can spark creativity rather than submission. Karen, hearing gossip of the foundation's donation, fumed. She had intended to punish the Johnsons for defying her vision. Instead, she watched them gain broader support, even financial help, effectively rewarding them for flaunting ugly colors. The result deepened her frustration, setting the stage for a confrontation that was growing inevitable. One warm afternoon, Timothy rolled down Spruce Circle with a friend, chatting about an upcoming school art project. Caroline walked behind them, carrying groceries. At the same moment, Karen emerged from her home. Their eyes locked, an unspoken tension thickening the air. Karen glared at the wheelchair's cosmic swirls. Timothy offered a polite wave. Karen responded with a stiff nod. Caroline quickened her pace, hoping to avoid a scene. But Karen stepped forward, speaking in a curt tone. "Your son's wheelchair. Can't you see how it clashes with the rest of the neighborhood? It's like graffiti on wheels parading around." Caroline froze, stunned by Karen's brazenness. "This is Timmy's personal choice. It doesn't harm anyone." Karen's voice wavered. "It's an eyesore. The HOA might eventually see it my way." Caroline seethed, but kept calm. "If that's your opinion, so be it. The HOA has already told you they can't regulate medical equipment." She turned away, guiding Timmy along. Karen's face flushed with anger. She spat after them. "I hope you realize you're inviting more trouble. Mark my words." Some neighbors witnessed the exchange from porches, shaking their heads in disbelief. The hostility was no longer cloaked in politeness. Karen had revealed her contempt openly. The confrontation rattled Caroline, confirming her suspicions that Karen was behind the vandalism. She filed an updated police report, naming Karen as the prime suspect, though lacking direct evidence. The officers assured her they'd keep the case open and recommended the family remain vigilant. Meanwhile, Timothy tried to shrug it off, but worry crept into his innocent face. With tension surging, Karen faced a new wave of social backlash. Some neighbors confronted her about her cruel remarks. She found it harder to enforce minor HOA codes as people resented her hypocrisy, making a fuss over trivial matters while harassing a disabled child. Karen felt cornered, failing to see that her own actions had fueled the resentment. Late one evening, in a reckless moment, Karen attempted yet another vandalism spree. She crept toward the Johnsons' porch, hoping to at least smear paint or pour some solvent on the wheelchair. Unbeknownst to her, the doorbell camera had been upgraded for night vision. The moment she stepped within range, the device pinged Caroline's phone. Marcus, alerted via text, quietly opened an upstairs window and snapped photos with a zoom lens. He caught Karen kneeling near the wheelchair, a small container in hand, presumably containing chemicals. Before she could do anything, he shouted, "Stop! We see you!" A startled Karen dropped the container and fled, vanishing into darkness. Though the footage was somewhat grainy, it clearly showed Karen's face mid-act. The next day, the Johnsons handed both photos and video to the police. A sense of relief washed over them. Finally, they had hard evidence. The local authorities took the new evidence seriously. Officer Jasmine Fields, assigned to the case, interviewed the Johnsons and reviewed the captured footage. Although partial and in night vision, it was unmistakably Karen's face and build. The container she dropped turned out to have paint thinner residue, confirming an intent to damage the wheelchair's freshly applied paint. Officer Fields confronted Karen at her home the following afternoon. Karen tried to feign ignorance, claiming she'd merely been checking on a suspicious figure. But the officer pointed out the contradiction. Why carry a container of paint thinner? Karen stumbled over her words, eventually demanding a lawyer. She was taken to the station for questioning, though she posted bail swiftly. This development rocked Willow Creek Estates. Word spread of Karen's arrest for attempted vandalism. The shock was twofold: that an HOA board member had stooped to harming a child's wheelchair, and that she'd been brazen enough to keep trying even after public suspicion. Neighbors reacted with outrage, calling for Karen's immediate removal from the board. Some left supportive messages at the Johnsons' doorstep, while others posted online condemnations of Karen's cruelty. Timothy, hearing that Ms. Ayres had been caught, asked his parents why she hated his chair so much. Marcus could only shrug, saying, "Some people just can't stand what's different. But that's not your fault, Timmy." The boy nodded, still unsettled but relieved the threat might be over. Within days, the HOA called an emergency session in the community center. A record crowd attended: neighbors, parents, even local reporters who'd caught wind of the vandalism scandal. The air crackled with tension. Board President Ellen Ruiz opened the floor to public comments. Many demanded Karen's resignation, outraged that an official entrusted with community standards had repeatedly defaced a disabled child's wheelchair. Others recounted how they'd suspected her from the beginning, citing her obsessive zeal for uniformity. Karen, out on bail, appeared with her attorney. She tried to claim innocence, insisting the video was misinterpreted, that she had tripped while holding paint thinner for a project in her garage. The crowd muttered skepticism. The police officer assigned to the case stood by, unwavering in her stance that the evidence strongly indicated intent to vandalize. Finally, Caroline took the microphone, voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. "My son's wheelchair is not a decoration you get to regulate. It's his freedom. You attacked him, singled him out because you dislike color. This is hateful, and we won't let you bully us or any other family with special needs." Applause thundered. Karen's lawyer shifted nervously. Sensing the crowd's fury, the board moved to vote on removing Karen from her position. The motion passed overwhelmingly, 7-0. Karen's attorney threatened legal action, but the damage was done. Karen was ousted. She left the building to a chorus of jeers, her authority in Willow Creek shattered. With Karen formally removed from the HOA board and publicly exposed, the next step was the criminal case. She faced charges of vandalism and attempted vandalism against a disabled individual's essential equipment, which held serious weight. While some neighbors hoped the court would impose a strict sentence, others felt she needed mental health counseling more than a prison term. Karen's attorney negotiated a plea, aiming for reduced charges in exchange for a public apology, restitution for the Johnsons, and mandatory community service. The final arrangement, reached after weeks of legal wrangling, mandated that Karen pay for any future wheelchair repairs and donate to a local disability rights charity. She was also assigned 200 hours of community service, ironically at a center for children with special needs, an attempt at restorative justice. For many in Willow Creek, it felt like a fair resolution, ensuring accountability and a measure of atonement. The Johnsons, though still hurt, found solace that the law had validated their ordeal. Timothy, at his parents' guidance, tried to view the outcome as a lesson in how the community and justice system can unite against cruelty. Through it all, the cosmic wheelchair remained unscathed, a shining emblem of resilience. Weeks later, Karen began her mandated community service at the Sunrise Therapy Center, helping staff with cleaning, organizing, and occasionally assisting with children's activities. She found herself surrounded by kids with various disabilities, some in wheelchairs far more elaborate than Timmy's. At first, she was distant, resentful of her punishment. But as the hours accumulated, she witnessed the unwavering joy and determination these children possessed. They reminded her of Timothy, and the cruelty of her actions weighed heavy on her conscience. In quiet moments, she reflected on the harm she'd caused. The vibrant wheelchair, something that gave a child a sense of identity, was no more ruining the view than any mainstream tool. She realized her obsession with uniformity had led her to a monstrous act. Contrition began gnawing at her heart, though pride prevented her from openly admitting it. Occasionally, staff at Sunrise teased her politely. "We hear you mess with a little boy's wheels. Don't you feel bad?" She forced a nod, stammering excuses. Over time, their compassion wore down her defenses. She found some measure of humility in the presence of children whose challenges dwarfed her petty fixations. If there was any redemption for Karen, it sprouted in these mandatory hours, face to face with the innocence she had once betrayed. One day, Karen finished her shift at the therapy center to find an envelope in her locker. Inside lay a simple note. "Ms. Harris, if you ever want to talk or offer a real apology, we'll listen." The Johnsons. Attached was a small Polaroid of Timothy smiling in his cosmic wheelchair. Karen stared at the photo for a long moment. A swirl of guilt and longing rose in her chest. She recalled the night she scratched that same wheelchair. She remembered how easily she'd justified it in her mind, only to see it turn into a radiant, unstoppable expression of the boy's spirit. Part of her felt undeserving of their willingness to hear her out. She pocketed the note, uncertain if she had the courage to face them. But a seed of introspection was planted. Perhaps, after completing her service, she'd find the nerve to approach the Johnsons directly. Time would tell if sincere remorse could mend even a fraction of the damage done. Meanwhile, Timothy's life regained its normal rhythm. Freed from the cloud of sabotage, he reconnected with friends in the neighborhood, breezing around in the cosmic wheelchair. Schoolmates found the design super cool, and teachers praised his ability to remain upbeat after the harrowing experiences. Marcus and Caroline, still protective, eased up on hypervigilance. The doorbell camera stayed, but the family no longer jumped at every sound outside. The wheelchair's swirling galaxy served as a daily reminder that adversity couldn't dim Timothy's spirit. Indeed, people from beyond Willow Creek recognized the story, sometimes sending him letters or small tokens of support. One day, while returning from the grocery store, Caroline noticed new children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Stars, comets, bright colors that echoed the wheelchair's cosmic theme. A few kids had doodled Timmy's galaxy, with arrows pointing to the Johnson home. Caroline was moved to tears. The neighborhood had embraced Timmy's uniqueness in direct contrast to Karen's attempt to erase it. It felt like a new era of acceptance had dawned in Willow Creek. The HOA, newly rid of Karen's oppressive presence, underwent a subtle cultural shift. Board members began encouraging a balance between regulation and personal expression. Some rules loosened, allowing for more varied yard decorations and front porch creativity. A sense that a uniform, drab environment was less important than forging a welcoming community took hold. At an HOA meeting, a proposal surfaced: Willow Creek Community Art Day, a festival where residents could invite local artists to paint small murals on designated fences or utility boxes, brightening the neighborhood. The motion passed easily. People recalled how Timothy's wheelchair fiasco had shown that color and creativity could unite them, rather than degrade property values. Additionally, some older residents started adopting a more tolerant stance. They recognized that policing every detail stifled the area's vitality. The success of Timmy's wheelchair art signaled a sea change. Where once folks worried about an HOA crackdown, now they found supportive board members endorsing modest personal projects, as long as they remained respectful. All these developments left the Johnsons feeling validated. Their ordeal hadn't been in vain. It had spurred positive, lasting reforms. Meanwhile, Timothy took satisfaction in seeing new bits of color pop up around Willow Creek, whether in newly painted mailboxes or flower planters. He felt a kinship with everyone expressing themselves, confident that no petty vandal could silence them again. One autumn evening, after dinner, the Johnsons were tidying up when the doorbell rang. Caroline answered to find Karen standing on the porch, hands trembling, eyes downcast. Timothy had gone to bed, so only Caroline and Marcus were present. They regarded Karen warily, remembering the heartbreak she'd caused. Karen spoke in a soft voice. "I finished my required service. I know I can't erase what I did, but I wanted to say I'm sorry, truly." She paused, swallowing. "I let my desire for uniformity overshadow basic humanity. I was wrong." Caroline stood in silence, her anger tempered by the raw remorse in Karen's eyes. Marcus eyed her carefully. "We appreciate that you're admitting fault, but it doesn't undo Timothy's hurt." Karen nodded. "I understand. I can't ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm ashamed of my actions. I'd like to pay for any additional repairs or expansions Timothy might want for his wheelchair." Marcus's jaw clenched. He exhaled slowly. "We have coverage now, but your gesture is noted." There was a long pause. "If you're genuine, maybe in time we can move forward. But it won't be easy." Tears welled in Karen's eyes. She set a small envelope on their porch table, likely containing a written apology or a check, and departed silently into the night. Caroline closed the door, grappling with complex emotions. Part of her felt a measure of relief that Karen had owned up. Another part remained protective, uncertain if trust could ever be rebuilt. When Caroline and Marcus told Timothy about Karen's visit, he absorbed their words, frowning. "Why did she do it in the first place?" he asked. They explained how some people can't handle differences, letting anger drive them. Timothy thought for a moment, then said, "If she's sorry, maybe we should forgive her. People make mistakes." Marcus asked gently, "Does it still hurt?" Timothy nodded. "Yes, but the new wheelchair paint is so cool now. If she learns not to do that stuff anymore, maybe it's okay." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I'd like to talk to her just once to see if she really means it." Caroline's eyes brimmed with tears. At 8 years old, Timothy showed a capacity for empathy that surpassed even some adults. They decided to invite Karen for a brief meeting under calm conditions, letting Timothy gauge her sincerity. The Johnsons prepared themselves for a conversation that might mark the final step in healing from the ordeal. A week later, in the early evening, Karen visited the Johnson home by invitation. Timothy met her in the living room, perched in his cosmic wheelchair. The swirling colors shimmered under the lamp, a vivid reminder of her vandalism. Karen's voice quivered as she greeted him. "Hello, Timothy. I wanted to say sorry to you directly." Timothy studied her face. "Mom said you scratched my chair because you didn't like how bright it was. But why?" Karen hesitated, struggling to articulate her prejudice. "I convinced myself your wheelchair's colors ruined our neighborhood's look." I care more about control than about how it might affect you. I was wrong. I never should have touched your chair. Timothy's eyes flicked to Caroline, who nodded encouragingly. The boy extended a small hand. Okay, thank you for saying sorry. They shook hands, a brief, delicate gesture bridging a chasm of harm. Karen's shoulders sagged with relief. She offered a small, uncertain smile. I'd like to help fix any future damage, or pay for new designs if you want. Timothy beamed. We already have the coolest design, but thanks anyway. A hush settled, thick with unspoken regret. The Johnsons recognized Karen's apology wouldn't dissolve all pain, but it was a step. For Karen, the child's forgiveness stung her conscience, reminding her of the cost of her hate-filled obsession. She left the house feeling both humbled and oddly unburdened. The rest lay in the slow process of rebuilding a life in Willow Creek without the power she'd once wielded. As autumn deepened, Willow Creek Estates held its first Community Art Day, an event proposed by the reformed HOA. Families set up tables with paints, canvases, and crafts in the Central Park. Local artists, including Danny Sky Chavez, led workshops. Kids painted murals on large panels that would later decorate the community center's walls. Timothy arrived in his cosmic wheelchair, instantly recognized by many who had followed his story. People offered warm greetings and asked him to help add a cosmic swirl to a communal mural. He happily obliged, swirling star patterns reminiscent of his wheelchair's design. The scene brimmed with color, music, and laughter, quite different from the rigid uniformity Karen once championed. Karen attended, too, quietly observing from a distance, uncertain of her place. She watched children joyfully painting flowers and older residents clapping along to a local band. Sky spotted Karen and gave a polite nod. Though no words were exchanged, the moment underscored how acceptance and creativity had triumphed over bitterness. As the sun set on Art Day, the community gazed upon the newly painted panels, each brimming with vibrant shapes and scenes. In that moment, the bright spirit Timothy once carried alone seemed to have spread across Willow Creek, ensuring every corner blossomed with color. The wheelchair sparkled among the gathering, a silent reminder that compassion and ingenuity can outshine even the darkest acts. Months later, Timmy remained the proud owner of his cosmic wheelchair. He'd grown a few inches, prompting another minor adjustment in seat height, which Sky happily repainted in matching patterns. The Johnsons had weathered a painful ordeal, but emerged with a sense that Willow Creek Estates, once overshadowed by rigid rules, had opened up to the importance of individuality. Karen's name rarely surfaced. She kept to herself, completing her community service obligations. Some neighbors still eyed her warily. Others maintained a cautious civility. Yet the atmosphere lacked the tense intimidation that once reigned. The memory of her vandalism lingered, overshadowed by the triumphant color that adorned Timothy's mobility. One late afternoon, Timothy and Caroline strolled the block, admiring the blossoming unity. Timothy's wheels hummed along the sidewalk, the swirling galaxies catching the dying rays of sunlight. A neighbor paused to wave and comment, "Timmy, your chair is still the coolest ride in town." He grinned, as bright as any star. In that grin lay the heart of Willow Creek's transformation. The wheelchair, once the target of cruelty, had become a beacon of resilience, inspiring others to embrace differences rather than fear them. As Timothy turned the corner, leaving a trail of cosmic color behind him, it felt like a lasting testament to how even the darkest impulses can be shattered by creativity, empathy, and the unbreakable spirit of a child. Over time, the tale of Timothy's wheelchair spread beyond Willow Creek Estates, shared online and in local news. People saw how a petty act, vandalizing a child's essential equipment, was flipped into a communal triumph. Danny Sky Chavez continued designing vibrant art for families, referencing Timothy's cosmic theme as a flagship success. Meanwhile, families with special needs kids drew inspiration from Timothy's story, painting their own medical devices in bold colors. Willow Creek itself softened, evolving from a place of strict uniform rules to one that celebrated subtle personal expressions, be it mailbox art, porch murals, or seasonal yard decorations. The cosmic wheelchair stood as a daily reminder that acceptance often grows from confronting cruelty head-on. Even Karen, in her quieter post-scandal existence, was said to have recognized that life's vibrancy can't be painted over or scratched out. And so, in this suburban corner of the United States, color reigned where once bland conformity had threatened to stifle it. The swirl of galaxies on Timothy's wheelchair kept shining, an unbreakable promise that the brightest hearts remain unstoppable, and that sometimes the best response to vandalism is an even more dazzling burst of creativity.